Well, I'm happy to report that more Hoosiers are stepping up and calling and reporting child abuse on a more frequent basis. In fact, the Indiana Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline reports that they have one call every 3 minutes in our state. So in 2015, there were more than 200,000 reports, which is up 50,000 from just 2 years ago. So think about that. 200,000 reports, up 50,000. DCS says that more reports are because we see increased education and awareness, so that's positive. There are some high-profile cases in the media where, again, we know that that raises awareness to the fact that we in Indiana as adults are all mandated reporters. We've also seen an increase in the number of schools reporting. So again, some of those recent headlines involving school staff makes everyone more aware. So they've also seen, DCS has also reported there's a large influx in requests from schools who want that training to make sure that we all know what our responsibilities are and that we reach out and make that call when we fear a child's in danger. Unfortunately, more Hoosier kids have been victims of either abuse or neglect recently. We know that 8% of Hoosier kids were visited for allegations of maltreatment, so 8% of overall of our kids. So when you ask, why is that the case? What happened here? You know, it's hard to get really clean numbers on that, but we do know that one of the biggest contributing factors is parental substance abuse. And I think we've all heard about some of those epidemics going on throughout our state. So that can lead to long-term separations when those parents are getting treatments, and that makes it difficult for the children. So the big headline here is that 52% of kids were removed by DCS were removed due to parental substance abuse. Again, here we know that in 2015, 48% of the time that was the case. Parental substance abuse. We know it's a big problem, not only for adults in our communities, but particularly for children as well. We know that DCS is working with their case managers to get in there, and when they're doing those investigations, work with the families on a prevention method, not just punitive actions, but really talking about how do we make this a safe environment for your kids moving forward. The warning signs can vary by the type of abuse, so it can be dependent upon whether it was sexual abuse, physical, emotional, or just general neglect. Now, often we know that it's a combination of multiples of those factors. So some of the general signs include a sudden change in behavior or school performance. We know that learning problems, difficulty concentrating, can occur when there's been child abuse or neglect, and that's separate from any sort of learning disabilities or problems that have been identified prior to the abuse. Sometimes they're always watchful. They feel like they're on pins and needles. They're waiting for something bad to happen. Sometimes it can be the reverse. They're overly compliant. We know that oftentimes normal behavior in a kid is if you ask them to pick up their backpack or their toys, maybe they're a little resistant. In the case of a child who's experienced abuse or neglect, they want to comply quickly with everything, every request. So that can be a sign as well. They come to school early, they stay late, they don't want to leave. It appears maybe they don't want to go home. And in addition, they can be reluctant to be around a particular individual. These are signs that doesn't necessarily mean that abuse and neglect is going on, but they should raise a red flag that is something that you should pay a little extra attention to. Obviously, the most severe consequence of child abuse and neglect can be child death. In addition to that, we're talking about physical injuries, delayed physical growth, neurological damage. As far as social and emotional, we're talking about depression. They can think about suicide. They can attempt suicide. With older kids, we get into alcoholism, criminal behavior, and many times they become the future abusers or victims themselves. So again, the psychological goes along with the emotional, and many times when we talk to those victims, they say the psychological can actually be worse because it takes a lot longer to heal from that than it does from a cut or a bruise. So aggression, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, all of those things trickle down and impact the other elements of their life: school, social circle, self-esteem. So again, they're going to need a lot of intervention from caring adults and a circle of caring adults to help them overcome that abuse and neglect. We start by understanding what abuse and neglect means. We understand the impact of trauma. We understand that kids are going to respond differently. Then we look for what are those resources that are out there. Obviously, we have a lot at the Indiana Youth Institute, and they're available on our website for anyone to access at any time. If you think about a child who has experienced trauma, make sure they have a safe place and a safety plan. Encourage them to talk, but don't force it. It's going to take a little time for them to open up and trust someone. Again, report abuse and neglect, 800-800-5556, really easy number, 800-800-5556. The best solution is prevention and intervention with experts. So here it's important that you do listen and you ask questions of those kids, but you do not attempt to become a counselor yourself. You're a listening ear. Now, that can change if in fact you become a volunteer within a structured system where you get all that training, such as court-appointed special advocates. So they work with kids in the juvenile justice court system. They get tons of training. They work about 10 to 15 hours a month, and they really do work and talk about what all comprehensive services do these kids need? How is that out-of-home placement going? How are things going in school? They also prepare to work with the judge to understand what's in the best interest of this child going forward. So if you're interested in that kind of component and involving that training and taking it up that next notch to help a child, it's childadvocatesnetwork.org. So again, you can do it just as a caring adult or as a trained volunteer. Either way, there are ways we can all help kids.